Hello. I hope that you can hear me. Uh, okay. Good evening, everyone. I hope that you can hear me. We are going to be queuing our video for the day on the second episode, a commons tragedy, which is the concept that tries to explain the greedy, or rather, the common ownership of resources and how human beings tend to react to it, and how they respond to resources being communally owned by everyone. Yeah, let's watch the video.
Previously on Jonathan Gullible.
Sailing again, John.
The clouds look pretty dark.
At least a storm would be something exciting for a change.
Help me!
She's under arrest.
What was her crime?
She came to work this morning with a sharp piece of metal.
But her invention allows people of all sizes and strengths to cut down trees.
You sound like some kind of troublemaker.
Phew. I think I lost him. Huh? What was that? Get away! I'm warning you! Yeah. You better run. Mouth of truth. You denounce, we pounce. Wildcats and screaming statues. This island keeps getting stranger. Oh, wow. Water.
I wouldn't drink that if I were you. That water ain't fit to drink.
Huh? Is the fishing any good?
Nope. These little critters were all I got.
What did you use for bait?
There's nothing wrong with the bait, Sonny. This lake's old and tired, like me.
Really? Thank you.
Years ago, I would have used these fish for bait. Really big fish back then.
What happened to the big fish?
They were all caught by the other fishermen. Now the little ones are all that's left.
Oh! Look out!
Huh.
There's a dangerous wildcat. It tried to attack me before.
Is that right?
Huh?
See if the wildcat wants some scraps.
They seem bigger in the jungle.
They usually do.
Sully, let's take a break.
You got it, Moss.
Okay, so everyone caught all the big fish, but little fish eventually grow up, right?
No. People will always come and take all the big fish or dump their rubbish in the lake.
Why do you let people take fish and dump rubbish in your lake?
Oh, this isn't. I just live here. It belongs to everyone, like the forest and the streams.
The fish belong to everyone, including me?
Not exactly. What belongs to everyone really belongs to no one. That is, until a fish bites my hook. Then it's mine.
I don't get it. The fish belong to everyone, which really means they belong to no one, until one bites your hook. Then the fish is yours? Do you do anything to take care of the fish or help them grow?
Why spend all my time taking care of the fish when someone else is just going to come and take them again? If someone gets my fish or pollutes the lake, then there goes all my effort. I wish I really did own the lake. Then I'd make sure the fish were taken care of, just like the ranchers do with their bison in the valley. I'd breed the strongest, fattest fish you've ever seen, and you can bet no fish rustlers or garbage dumpers would get past me.
Who manages the lake now?
The lake manager is appointed by the Council of Lords and is paid from my taxes. The lake manager is supposed to watch out for too much fishing and dumping. The funny thing is, friends of the Council of Lords get to fish and dump as much as they please.
So the lake isn't well managed.
The fish I catch keep getting smaller, while the manager's salary keeps getting bigger. Judge for yourself.
These machines give me the creeps.
Fear is wisdom.
Scared of the big bad behemoths?
You deviants to be as well read on history as us virtue keepers. The white signal.
Kinda looks like gray smoke, Moss.
Actually, it's almost a beige if you really think about it.
That's right.
Let's go.
What about the prisoner?
Dear citizen, the people of Corumpo demand your voluntary service to accompany our companion and this deviant to the zoo.
Do you think any of these boats are seaworthy? I'm trying to get home.
I thought you might not be from Corumpo.
Who's Corumpo?
Not who. This whole island is Corumpo.
I wanted an adventure, and I sure got one. I got shipwrecked.
Odd. You're nothing like they said outsiders would be.
Who?
If anyone found out you ain't from here, you'd be in a lot of trouble. Don't tell no one unless you trust them. And you can't hardly trust nobody.
Out of my way.
Oh no.
Citizens of Corumpo.
Hide.
Huh?
Huh. It looks like it's just that old man over there, Moss.
Are you Phineas Sharp?
Hey, you answer when a virtue keeper is asking.
Yes, that's me. See, I'm busy.
The white smoke does not lie, Mr. Sharp. We retrieved a letter from a mouth of truth saying you are fishing without a license and spreading untruths about our fair lake manager.
Huh? Manager. Ha! I'd like to tell him where to shove that fishing pole.
These are serious accusations, Mr. Sharp. You're looking in the zoo. Hard re-education. Intellect transgressions like yours are rarely done alone. Do you have accomplices? Some tree workers also told us about a strange troublemaker around here. Help us, and maybe we lighten your penalty.
Only troublemakers I see are you and that worthless lake manager.
Suit yourself. Sully, he and that girl can keep each other company at the zoo.
With pleasure, Moss.
Ow! That hurts.
Oh. So.
Ah! Ouch! My face! Get back here, you little devil!
Huh? Hiding behind a rock when an old man needed help. Some adventurer you turned out to be. How am I gonna get home now? How'd you get away so fast? Thanks for helping me out back there. I guess I'm not alone after all. So what am I gonna do? Yeah, you're right. I know. Gotta pick myself up and keep going. Okay, I'm going. Are you coming? We've got adventuring to do.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. We just finished watching our second episode, second video on the commons on the common strategy. Yes. So now we are going to give room to our presenter of the day, Adam, to get started.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I hope we have had an awesome and wonderful week. I would like to begin presenting my presentation today. And well, after going through the video, what we want to talk about is mismanagement of shared resources, and this is ideally, based on the video that we've just watched. And so, what we are going to do is that we are going to be moving from solutions and concept of tragedy of the commons. And before we even dive into the story of Korompo and Jonathan's journey, let us just take a moment to maybe just understand what this session really is about, because I feel like there's going to be need to be able to connect what the video we've already watched with what we are talking about. And so this isn't just about fish or polluted lakes, but it's more about how we get to manage what belongs to all of us. That is our environment, our taxes, our roads, our public institutions, and even our shared values. And so the story ideally represents us with a metaphor, so to say, which is the tragedy of the commons. But our goal today is to examine how that metaphor plays out in real world. And so we are going to be looking at or understanding the concept of the tragedy of commons. We are going to identify real world examples of mismanaged shared resources, as well as explore how property rights, accountability, and even liberty-based governance can solve such problems, and even relate to the story's lesson to the African economic and governance reality. Because the anatomy of mismanagement, begins, or when we look at it, we begin by understanding why shared resources tend to get overused or destroyed. We get to ask ourselves, is it greed, is it ignorance, or is it an issue of system failure? And we will get to revisit Jonathan's experience in Korompo, a place where collective responsibility led to disaster, and even break down what it reveals about governance and personal accountability. And generally, just to recap it all, picture this. Jonathan walks into a once beautiful fishing village on the island of Korompo, and the air smells foul. The waters are murky, and he gets to meet a frustrated fisherman who is shouting at locals. Now, what could be the problem? Everyone depended on the same lake for fish, but now there are barely any fish that is left. And the lake was meant to be used for everyone. And, that is what we are saying, it's for a common good. But then without clear rules of ownership or responsibility, it slowly became, everyone's to use, but no one's to protect. And as the fish dwindled, or the number of the fish in the lake dwindled, people rushed to take what was left, and overfishing, survived so that they could survive, and even without thinking about tomorrow. Now, when we are looking at it and trying to understand ideally what tragedy of commons means, now this is an idea that was coined by or popularized by Garrett Hardin in 1968, and he describes it as a situation where individuals, acting out of their own self-interest, end up depleting a shared resource, even though everyone knows that, in the long run, this behavior harms the entire community. And, to illustrate this, Imagine a piece of land that everyone in a village can use to graze their cattle. And each herdsman naturally wants to add more animals because every new cow means more profit. But individually, this might make perfect sense because the benefit of one extra cows goes directly to that individual. But the cost of overgrazing at the end of the day, the damage to the land, which is shared by everyone. So while each herdsman gains a little by adding more cows, the collective damage grows until the pasture can no longer sustain any of them. And eventually the land becomes barren and everyone loses. And so that's really the tragedy. Not because everyone or anyone sets out to destroy the commons, but because everyone's rationale combines to produce an irrational outcome. And when you're looking at the freedom of freedom in the commons without accountability or stewardship, it leads to ruin for generally all. And when we connect this idea to Jonathan Gallible's story, in the episode, Jonathan visits a fishing village, and we've all seen how everybody depended on the lake and what ideally gets to happen. At the end of the day, it gets to be polluted, there's a lot of overfishing, and so there's barely enough fish or adequate fish for the people of the village to be able to depend on. And while to some benefit, shared ownership could be good, there are reasons as to why it would fail. And one of these would be, no clear ownership. And, when everyone owns it, no one actually gets to protect it. And so when no one owns that resource, no one has a strong incentive to protect it because at the end of the day, it is nobody's responsibility. And the benefits of its conservation is shared by everyone. And that would mean that the costs are, borne by the individual who gets to conserve it. And so nobody would want to feel or want to bear the cost of conserving it, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you get to do with it, because somebody else somewhere else is going to ideally misuse it. So this creates a disincentive for responsible stewardship, because at the end of the day, whether or not you get to conserve it, anybody else who does not feel the need to be able to conserve it will just use it as they want. The other reason as to why it gets to fail, or we get to see why it failed even in the story, is because of poor governance. And, rules are either absent or they are enforced by self-serving elites. And rules without enforcement are words on paper at the end of the day. And so when local authorities or managers lack the capacity, independence, or will to enforce rules and regulations, generally fail. And worse is when enforcement is selective, and it is one that favors the friends or elites, or just generally favors the cronies. And at the end of the day, trust will evaporate and compliance will collapse. And so people get to learn that bribery or even connection pay more than rules. And so at the end of the day, even when you look at Corampo, the appointed manager exists, yes, but he's either captured by elites or lack the tools to be able to do his job. And so the result is generally a theater of performance where rules appear, but they don't generally protect the lake. And it is important for us to be able to have proper governance, because effective governance must, it gets to be impartial, and it's able to be transparent and accountable, not just for for the sake of having it available or present. And the other issue is generally moral detachment. And at the end of the day, it's about morality. Responsibility is diffused, and blame becomes a collective and meaningless. When we all get to begin saying that I didn't get to do it because at the end of the day, when I get to do it, somebody else is still going to, direct all their seawater to the lake, and it would make no sense for me to do it. We get to be able to continue blaming ourselves, and at the end of the day, it becomes a collective and a meaningless endeavor. And so we need to be able to be morally attached to these kinds of things because we get to see how best they help us. And so the need to be able to protect them is very key. And then there's information asymmetry. And ideally for this, individuals may not be fully aware of the impact of their actions on the resource that they have around them. And at the end of the day, they may undermine or maybe generally underestimate the rate of depletion or even overestimate the resources capacity to regenerate. And that is why you get somebody gets to say, you know what, at the end of the day, it's just one piece of paper. So whether or not I get to throw it to the lake, it won't make any difference. Or somebody gets to say, I am only going to be, throwing this rubbish, or I only get to drain sewer here once in a week. So at the end of the day, the effect is very minimal. Or somebody gets to say that, I can fish from morning to evening today because, I won't be fishing tomorrow. So we get to either underestimate the rate of the depletion based on the very small things that we get to do that we think would cause no harm, or we get to really get to overestimate the capacity of that resource to be able to regenerate itself. And so being able to be informed on these kinds of things and knowing that it's just the very small chunks of dirt that we throw into these resources. It is just the very small amounts that we get to steal from the government or from the people is what gets to really inadvertently at the end and cumulatively get to cause harm is very key. And when we lack communication and cooperation, it is difficult to be able to establish and enforce rules for resource management. And so at the end of the day, individuals get to be reluctant to restrain their own behavior if they believe that others will not do the same. And so the importance of just being able to ensure that we can just communicate properly and cooperate as a community to be able to protect the resources that we have so that they don't get to be misused is key. And when we are looking at it ideally and we are trying to connect this to the real world situation, take a look at probably Lake Victoria, which is shared or is a resource that is shared by Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. It is one of Africa's largest fresh water. And at the end of the day, just a minute. Sorry about that. So as I was saying, when you're looking at Lake Victoria, which generally borders Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, and it is one of Africa's largest freshwater fish source, now that is severely, overfished. Ideally, fish stocks have declined by over 70% since the 1980s, and this is ideally because of the open access and weak regulation. And you find each fisherman races to catch more before others gets to do, and just like in Corampo. And the reason why I'm bringing this is so that we can be able to see ideally what it means to have a common resource that is being overused, because at the end of the day, we are not able to properly, we do not have the moral attachment, or when I get to go overboard, this is going to happen. And we get to even as well look at the case with Mau Forest, where, and even with most of the forests in Africa and even in the world, there's a lot of deforestation of illegal logging and, from illegal logging and encroachment under the claim, that this is public land and, we need more trees to be able to build houses, or we tell ourselves that forests cover loss, and, this threatens rivers feeding lakes and things like that. And so poor enforcement and unclear land rights and issues around these kinds of things make it a living tragedy for some of these common resources that we get to look at, or that we get to need to enjoy. And this is also equal to, I think, Lake Chad, the Chad Basin, which is shared by Chad, Nigeria, and even Cameroon. And, it has shrunk by almost 90% since the 1960s because of the overuse of water and even the poor cross-border coordination. And at the end of the day, millions have been displaced, and there's been a lot of regional conflicts that has intensified. But then, of course, there's the bit of when we're looking at public funds, which is one big issue in Africa, and how most government officials get to use the public funds, which in real case is the taxes that we get to pay. And for Kenya, for example, county budgets are generally county budgets and development funds are treated as public property, because at the end of the day, it is money that's coming from the public. The government is doing nothing to be able to get this money. We are the ones who are sending money to the government. And so most of the time, a good number of times, they're for personal enrichment. And we get to see how people who came from, not so rich backgrounds get into government, and within 3, 4, 6 months, or even a year, or even the first term, they get to have an increased net worth. Somebody gets into power or into politics when his net worth is probably about $1 million, 2, 3 million, but then within 6 months, 8 months, they get to be, their net worth increases by, tenfold, and now they are multi-millionaires and things like that. And the result is probably, and this is because of a lot of ghost projects, and even in Kenya, we've seen a lot of ghost workers. And at the end of the day, it is a lot of stalled development and institutional distrust. And one thing that generally also hits home is the issue about missionary-built hospitals, schools, churches, and etc. Take a moment and look at the locality that you stay in, and look at the state of any missionary-built facility, be it a hospital, be it a church, or be it a school, and ask yourself, when was the last time that facility was either maintained, repainted, or received proper major works, if it gets any at all? And you see, at the end of the day, brings a lot of issues. Originally, many missionaries built schools and churches and the hospitals. And, they were community-centered. They were properly maintained because there was a lot of funding that was coming from, the missionary work. And, they were guided by clear values and accountability, because it was being run to what the missionaries wanted. But after the missionaries left or transferred management to the local governments or to the local communities, many of these institutions became, shared or, public property. And that's where the tragedy begins. And because ownership then now becomes unclear, the question of who gets to maintain the school becomes to, come up. Who gets to maintain the church? Is it the congregation? Is it the pastor? Or do we still need the missionaries to come back and, give us 1,000 shillings to be able to repaint just the walls? Is it the responsibility of the government, or should we tax the entire community to be able to maintain these kinds of facility? And so, at the end of the day, there's a lot of neglect of these infrastructures, and they deteriorate because maintenance is someone else's job. We do not get to feel the pinch or the pain of these structures collapsing, or these structures dying or no longer being used, because we didn't get to spend anything for them to be built. And so at the end of the day, whether or not anything gets to happen to them, we don't really care. And at the end of the day, this has a lot of effect on the depletion or on natural and social capital, because it gets to deplete it. When these shared resources, just like the lake that is in Corampo, when they are overused or mismanaged, there is immediate result in depletion. And when you're taking the story of the lake, there's overfishing that led to the collapse of the fish population. And when you're looking at it in real life, it is the same case with deforestation. It is the same case with overgrazing. It is the same case with the misuse of public funds, the misuse of money that we send to the government. It is the same case with the misuse of communal facilities like boreholes, like markets, and everything else. But beyond nature, it also depletes the social capital, the trust and cooperation that holds communities together. And once the resource is gone or it is corrupted, rebuilding it takes decades, if it happens at all. Because at the end of the day, it gets to be difficult for us to be able to trust that, this politician is going to be able to, properly spend the money or the allocations that, is given or he is allocated to his department, and several other issues like that. The other thing is the decline in public trust and accountability. Mismanagement breeds suspicion and resentment, and people begin to distrust leaders. People begin to have issues with government institutions and even with each other, because at the end of the day, we tell ourselves that when we get to power, everyone is stealing, so why shouldn't I? And this becomes a mindset, and we get to hear people say that, I'll only speak against corruption until the day I am the one who's benefiting from it. And so when we get to the position where it is our opportunity, or it is the time for us to be able to defend the very basic thing that we've been speaking against politicians doing, when we get there, now we want to be able to be partakers of it. We forget the pain that we used to feel when we were missing out on what we needed to get because so-and-so had a huge stomach that he needed to fill. And, there's a lot of issues about funds being mismanaged. In Kenya, there's issues around the CDF funds, the issues around, county projects, there's issue around, public land being grabbed. And at the end of the day, it's just get to lose, faith on the in the public good. And without this trust, even good policies end up failing, because how are we going to the government or that the policies that we're coming up with, however strong they are going to be implemented? And lastly, there's of stunted economic growth and opportunity. So when collective resources are properly mismanaged, productivity and entrepreneurship suffers. At the end of the day, fishermen lose livelihoods, farmers lose fertile land, and even youth get to lose jobs, or they get to miss out on an opportunity or an enabling environment for them to be able to create their own businesses that can thrive. And so instead of a thriving economy, you get a lot of dependence and poverty traps. And then this creates a situation where corruption becomes the only profitable trade. And so this is why, most countries with poor governance of, public funds have lower GDP per capita and even high inequality. And so what are some of the practical solutions that we can get to look at? What are some of the things that we can get to do to be able to end these kinds of things? And one of these is probably clarifying ownership and incentives. And, because we spoke, when I mentioned some of the reasons as to why shared ownership can fail, we mentioned no clear ownership. And one of the root causes of this tragedy, especially even in real life, is unclear ownership. And so when everyone owns something, it often means no one truly feels responsible for it. And so the solution is to assign clear rights and responsibilities whether through community-based management, whether through cooperatives or private ownership, or even being able to remind those who are in power what exactly needs to happen. Because when people have a stake in the outcome, they begin to care about the sustainability. When we come together and put our funds together to be able to build or to be able to rebuild that missionary hospital, to be able to rebuild that school that was built by the missionaries and handed over to the community, when there's a chunk of our cash in it, we get to feel responsible when we see somebody lift a stone and throw at the window, at a window pane during protest. Because at the end of the day, we are the ones who are going to go back deep into our pockets to be able to get money to repair it, because it is us that built it. And think of successful community forests in Kenya, or even just fishing zones that are managed by local cooperatives. When you look at the way they have been managed, you get to see how a lot of accountability is brought out, and how a lot of a shared sense of responsibility comes out, because we know that at the end of the day, if this resource gets to be depleted, or if there's any harm towards it, we are the ones who are going to be suffering the pain of it. Then we as well need to strengthen local accountability. Rules are made in distant offices that rarely work for local realities. And decentralized management allows communities to force their own rules, because they know their resources better than bureaucrats do. And so local accountability, such as councils, committee, or even associations, can monitor usage. They can reward, they can monitor usage, they can apply peer pressure, and they can as well reward responsible behavior. In the case of Corampo, in the story of Jonathan Gullible, if fishermen had created their fishing code of conduct, would have balanced access with sustainability without even waiting for the authorities to be able to do it. And so real stewardship starts when rules are written by those they affect. With stewards of it, going to build awareness of property rights and even responsible participation. And we can use technology to help for tracking, fishing limits. We can use social media to be able to, spread out the information, because knowledge transforms passive beneficiaries into active stewards. When we get to transfer that knowledge, then somebody that gets to feed of it is able to understand what needs to happen, and they are able to begin taking proper care of the resources that we have. They are able to begin holding government officials responsible long term. And we can as well encourage private stewardship and innovation, because private individuals and enterprises often manage resources better because their survival depends on it. And so when we encourage private-public partnerships and community enterprises that, align with profit, then there's going to be a lot of sustainability, because at the end of the day, this is where our survival comes from. And so if we are not able to, reward innovators who create alternative systems, then at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of poverty. There's going to be a lot of hunger, because these are systems, or these are resources that we actually depend on. And so when they are depleted or when they are overused, we don't get to have anything to depend on. And there's the issue of also just introducing market-based mechanisms such as tradable fishing quotas or even carbon credits, which is ish. There's a lot of discussions about whether or not it works. And these are things that make conservation profitable. And when people protect what they can profit from responsibly, the resources become things that are reusable long term. And lastly, even as I summarize, we need to redefine the role of the government. We need to come from a point where we get to look at what really we think the government needs to do. Because, for example, if I asked you right now, is it really the role of the government to employ the youths? A good number of you will say yes. Is it really the role of the government to, take you to school or to offer free education? A good number of people will say yes. But at the end of the day, when the government is offering free education, where is that government going to be getting the money to be able to, buy stationaries for the students, to be able to pay teachers, and to be able to ensure that all those government-funded schools get to run? The answer is simple: the tax. And where does that tax come from? Your pocket. So at the end of the day, that free education is against your pocket. And so the government should be a referee, not a player. So its role is to enforce contracts, to protect property rights, and to punish, polluters or offenders, but not to micromanage every net or every cow. So excessive control, such as we've seen in Corampo, only worsens outcome by replacing community initiative with red tapes. And government should instead create a framework that rewards integrity, that rewards competition and innovation. And a limited but effective state builds a responsible citizenry. And it, at the end of the day, prevents us from being in another Corampo situation, or prevents us from finding ourselves in the very same situation that their fishermen find themselves in, the story of Jonathan Gallibol. And it is very important to note that Corampo isn't just a fictional lake. It is a mirror to many of our societies. And the good news is that ownership, education, liberty-based governance can turn every of this tragedy into renewal. When we are able to just go for ownership, we are able to educate the masses, we're able to go for liberty-based governance that ensures there's limited government control, then we are able to preserve these kinds of resources. And at the end of the day, we don't get to die of anger. We don't get to have a lower GBT, not GBT, but then a lower. We don't get to be people who are seen as a poor nation. And the practical solutions are as simple as this. When you're looking at the bigger picture, like I said, Corampo isn't just a story, but it's a metaphor for mismanaged or every mismanaged public system. And the tragedy of the commons is a tragedy of human nature that shows how when systems fail, what exactly gets to happen. And so reforms begin with a mindset, and freedom at the end of the day begins with responsibility. And when people see themselves as owners, not dependents, the systems get to flourish. And that's what Jonathan lands. And it is what ideally Africa needs to embrace. You need to recognize your role in the tragedy. Every shared crisis, from polluted rivers to mismanaged funds, starts with a small act of neglect. And the tragedy of the commons isn't just about the fish, isn't about cows overgrazing, or isn't just about forests. It's about how we treat what belongs to all of us, with a lot of truth, with a lot of trust, time, or even talent. And so the first step is to acknowledge your personal responsibility, because at the end of the day, we need to begin saying that I am part of the problem and therefore part of the solution. I am the one who gets to, benefit from the corruption. I'm the one who gets to throw one bottle into the lake. I'm the one who gets to direct, dirty water into, or sewers into the lake. So I am part of the problem, and therefore I am part of the solution. And we as well need to champion for systems that reward responsibility and not dependence, because when we move from a culture that rewards connections and compliance to one that rewards competence and contribution, there's going to be a lot of benefits, because questioning systems where governments own everything but are accountable for nothing becomes because now we are beginning to ask questions. Why exactly are we the ones giving you this money? But instead of us seeing you building roads, we see you buying new cars. We see you flying from one country to the other. So at the end of the day, we get to end up having a lot of systems that we've put in place to be able to just put everybody, or just hold these people accountable. And then you need to start local. Think big, or just act and act small. It starts with the very small act that you get to do, because the future of good governance starts in our homes. It starts in our campuses, and it starts in our communities. So organize local cleanups, community saving groups, business forums, attend public participation forums, and hold your local leaders accountable for their mismanagement of funds. Because we need to think of liberty as a muscle. It grows when you practice it daily, and not just when you preach it. And of course, there's the bit about telling better stories about liberty and stewardship, and being the generation that refuses to repeat the mistakes that we have seen in the story of Jonathan Gullible. And I think that would be it from my end, unless there's any question.
All right. Yeah, I hope that you can get. Thank you for that presentation on a commons tragedy. And really, I think it tries to explain to us how we get to use resources, and particularly when we assign responsibility to any person. And this is what raises really the question of how we get to use resources as a people, as citizens. That very resource that we regard as, looking at maybe things like parks, like rivers and such, forests and such. How do we get to make use of them? How do we own them communally? How do we make sure that they are not depleted? How do we make sure that they are sustainable in the long run? So thank you so much, Adam, for that presentation. I'm still waiting for maybe a couple of questions, maybe one or two questions. Those that have questions, please do send your questions in so we can respond to them. I'm aware that we're having some issues with our attendance sheet today. We're going to be fixing that in a very short while. So thank you. Thank you for being patient with that. Yes, I'll attempt to share the link. There's a question for you. Is asking in the clip, episode 2, why was the fish becoming smaller, becomes rich? Why was the fish becoming small while the manager becomes rich? I don't to that.
Yes. Thank you very much for that question. At the end of the day, we get to see how. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes. So the fish were becoming smaller while the manager becoming rich because one, there was the mentioning of the pollution of the water. And so at the end of the day, that only means that there isn't enough or proper environment for the fish to be able to grow to size. And we remember they said initially he would be using the very small fish that he caught to be able to catch bigger fish. And so a polluted environment does not provide proper a proper environment for the people within it, or the people that get to use it to thrive. And so getting smaller over time because there was a shown, we saw the issue around CO being directed to it. And at the end of the day, the managers are getting fatter and fatter because they are benefiting from their friends who are polluting these environments. But at a system that say look at, for example, a community that has a lake, and there's a lot of pollution into the lake. At the end of the day, we can't say that the government or the governments of those areas or those communities are not aware that a certain company or a certain industry is directing its waste into the river. They are aware. And so the only way that those companies are continuing to do that is because there is a lot of heavy payouts that are being given to the officials of that community to be able to keep silent that entire issue and turn to the other side and not look at the issue. And so at the end of the day, when there is a lot of these kinds of issues happening, there's probably somebody who's responsible. And in this case, it was the managers who are responsible that are turning another eye or turning sideways so that they don't get to look at the issue because they are receiving or they are benefiting from the very people who are polluting that environment. And so at the end of the day, look at it even as in a local community. We get to say that not all of us get to have access to, say, CDF funds and everything else. It is not that not all of us get access to it. Very few of us get access to it because very few people get access to it because they know who is in charge of those funds. And so at the end of the day, while we get to be locked out of it, the people who are supposed to be using it, not using it, but the people who are supposed to be dispensing it to us are using it for their own benefit. And so that is why, while we continue to get thinner and thinner, they continue to get fatter and fatter because the resources we are supposed to be benefiting from, they are the ones who are benefiting from largely. And that is them plus the people around them. And we could call them plus their cronies.
See a lot of comments are coming in, particularly on our last question on what do you think is the best way to balance individual freedom and collective responsibility. If I can maybe say a few. Lydia Minor says, I think to balance, we need to create awareness on personal responsibility so as each individual knows their limits in a certain shared resource. I can see Mudhama responding to Festus saying this, that on the case of fish growing smaller and the manager becoming richer, and he says that's a classic example of what happens when leaders act in self-interest rather than in the interests of others. Joseph, when you, I think in the response to our question on what ought to be done, he says, for progress, we ought to be part of it, of the process, take into action what we can do for those that are delegated, follow up, ensure that things work according to initial intent without leakage. Monica G says, introduce rules, appoint some leaders, and hold accountable those who misuse resources. Scholam Sony says, this means give people the liberty to make choices, but nurturing a mindset where those choices are guided by an inner sense of purpose that connects personal goals to the well-being of others. Okay. I think there's a question for you, Adam, from Sats Code. He's asking, how can spontaneous order and formal rules complement each other? How can spontaneous order and formal rules complement each other? Adam, if you're able to respond to that question kindly. And, I really think for me, when we talk about formal rules, really, they largely just border on, on making sure that as an individual, for me, I don't step on the feet of another person, really, on things like the enforcement of contracts. For example, out of that need to meet my own desires, I shouldn't be going to the extent of where, in a desire to fulfill my own needs, that I'm impacting, or rather, I'm infringing on other people's freedoms and rights. And really, formal rules for me just border to just the general rule of law, and that's just making sure that there are those rules like the enforcement of contracts that I've been mentioning that I can think of, particularly in the business field. Essentially just not infringing on the right of others. I think that in as much as we are guided by the desire to fulfill our own needs, I think now the formal rules will come in to make sure that we don't do that at the expense of others. Adam, you have something to add on that? Yeah. Okay. In the meantime,
I think you.
Okay.
Yes,
yeah. Go ahead.
Just proceed. I think for me, at the end of the day, you have ideally answered it well, because when you're looking at it, really, it's about being able to just be able to ensure that we don't get to infringe on other people's rights. We are able to just coexist without limiting other people, and we are able to ensure that all what we need as what I need as an individual doesn't really get to the point where it gets to limit ideally what another individual require. And so I think for me that would sort of sum it all, because it also gets to become really the backbone of how a society needs to operate. Because at the end of the day, it is what I need, how I need it, and ensuring that it doesn't really get to interfere with what you, as my neighbor or as a fellow citizen, also as well requires. So I think it would be easier to just say you've summed it up better, and that should just be the perfect answer.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this second episode of the Jonathan Galibo Guide, rather introduction to economic freedom, episode 2 on a commons tragedy, which is really the concept that illustrates the consequences of communal ownership and interested behavior. And I mean self-interested behavior, and I hope that we've been able to pick up some insights on how maybe we can feed into policies and guidelines and rules that border on the use of communal property, public properties that we are having as nations, as communities, and so on. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this session. We appreciate you taking your time to be with us. We appreciate you taking your time to be with us for this session. And we hope that you've learned something. We hope that we can see you in our next session. In our next session, coming next week, we are going to be moving on to into episode 3. We are going to be moving into episode 3, and we hope that you can be able to join us for the session 10. As we continue, remember that we have a total episodes that we have for this. This is something that we're going to be doing for the next 8 months. Being our second, I mean, not months, but weeks being our second. And yes, let's see you in our next session that we are going to be looking at food police, and essentially we're going to be looking at price controls and how it leads to scarcity and all that. So we're going to be having our guests, Maureen Barasha, who is a programs officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs in Kenya. And yeah, we hope that we can see you next week. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you for the program, and I hope that we see you next time.